Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I thank you for joining us today. Today, we're going to be talking about something that's a little bit different. We're going to be telling you a tale that is one of the 7 great stories in the world. That's right, a tale of greed, of power, and of course, tragedy. And most of all, this will be a true story. Now, before we start, we do mention that if this is your first time with us, we do long-form political commentary on this channel. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, simultaneously taking your comments, your tweets, and your texts, even your phone calls, because we believe in free speech. And we talk about the issues of the day and what you think about them. We hope that you will join us on Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our next live stream. Now, we did promise that we're going to be talking about one of the 7 great stories of history and a tragedy, and it will be true. And this story starts at the very top, the pinnacle, starting with Edward R. Murrow back in 1935, a gentleman who has become one of the greatest newsmen in the entire industry, known as one of the best journalists ever. In fact, he helped to take down the McCarthy era, a time in America where individuals were being persecuted because of their political beliefs, the Red Scare at the time. McCarthy is so well known that a movie was made after him based on his famous catchphrase, "Good night and good luck." At the same time, there was also another man, Walter Cronkite, who became known as the most trusted man in America, working from 1935 to 2009. His main emphasis and focus was perhaps the 1960s until the 1980s. He covered World War II, the Nuremberg trials, Vietnam. He covered the moon landing and NASA, the death of President John F. Kennedy, and the death of Martin Luther King. He is one of the most famous men in America, and his catchphrase was, "And that's the way it is." These men were the pinnacle of the news media, and every journalist, every newsman, every political commentator hopes to reach even half the levels that these men set forth. This was when the media was good. But then we entered a different age as we got into the post-60s era. We had the advent of things like cable TV. We had the personal computer, which led us to the internet. And that also led us to the 24-hour news cable industry. And the world changed a lot because we started seeing things where the news media and many activists as well were taking advantage of the fact that people were watching the juiciest of stories, the most interesting tragedies and horrors that could be made. And it wasn't long before people understood that all you needed to do was show a picture, tell a story about some horrible thing like children digging for lithium in Africa. And you would have eyeballs all day. And eyeballs meant ad revenues. And the companies that owned the news media industry knew this is how they could make the most money. So we would see over and over again a story about some downtrodden, poor, impoverished child in some faraway part of the world, and sometimes just around the corner. And with these horrible images, eyeballs would come and ad revenues would go with it. And activists soon learned that to tell their stories was to tell the worst of tragedies in America. Now that brings us to 2000, into the 2000s. In 2012, there was a huge surge of activism, matching the surge in the 24-hour news cycle. And one of the biggest things that we saw in 2012 was the introduction of Occupy New York, which soon became the Occupy movement across the entire nation. It swept from New York City all the way into the reaches of small towns like Binghamton, New York. And this was something that was going to last forever, we were told, until things changed, until the activists got what they wanted, which was, of course, equity. It was the first times that many people had heard of the idea of equity. And it quickly became a mainstream talking point. And even in Binghamton, it took hold with the Occupy movement, as even the then mayor of Binghamton, New York, Matt Ryan, a very liberal individual, a progressive, took hold of that and grabbed it with both arms. But sadly, like many things, we see that it ended. In 2012, January 13th of 2012, which happened to be Friday the 13th, that was the end of Occupy Binghamton and the entire Occupy movement throughout the entire nation. Now, as we said at the time, Friday the 13th was not the end of the Occupy Binghamton. That happened long ago, but it will linger like the bad aftertaste of a diet soda. Yet, like all actions without purpose, the majority of the public will ignore it and deal with the needs of reality in daily life. The net result? An increase, even if minimal, of the city of Binghamton taxpayers. The news media made its money. Eyeballs were glued for months on end, weeks on end, covering the various people at the local and national level, even across the world, of this movement that had no true purpose other than to say they were angry and they wanted something from someone. But a lot of people learned from that lesson of how to capture the eyeballs of the news media, how to move forward their movements, their political agendas for a mutual benefit of the news media and those particular activists, without actually benefiting the communities that they happen to be involved with. And that brings us to what we saw in 2016. In May 2016, we saw that Black Lives Matter finally came into the Binghamton, New York area. It was a new movement, and it was comprised of a lot of members of Citizen Action and the Working Families Party. But it had one key thought, that if we don't get it, shut it down. In fact, 50 protesters comprised of adults and children as young as 10 gathered in front of the city hall in the city of Binghamton to announce their displeasure, chanting, and I quote, "If we don't get it, shut it down." And what was it that they were looking to get? What was it that they really wanted? Well, according to one of their members at the time, Larry Parham, everybody has a right to equity. This country guarantees us equal rights. Those rights are guaranteed to us, equal rights, based on our need. People don't need the same thing. So we can't bring parity in the country by dealing strictly with equality. And that's what we're trying to do, bring parity to the country, end quote. It's perhaps the first time that many local communities, especially in New York, in upstate New York, away from the city and the high-end politics and the dominance of the Democratic Party, the progressive movement really started to show itself with that Occupy, and then followed it with the Black Lives Movement. Now, nothing really came of the Black Lives Movement at that time, and while they did make their introduction with a protest, and had several protests in between 2016 and 2019, they really didn't get the news media attention. There was nothing juicy enough. The news media, local and national, needed a juicy story to grab onto, something that would benefit their pockets and would benefit this new organization. And it was in January of 2019, January 15th of 2019, that they got exactly that. Because it was on January 15th of 2019, 4 black girls at one of the schools in the community alleged that they had been strip searched. and that this was done because of their race. That was a juicy story, and it was something that the local news media could not resist. And in fact, this story grew and grew, though many people had doubts within the community, because Binghamton was not known as a racial hotbed. This was something that was foreign to many of the residents and individuals within the community and the community surrounding it. As it turned out, on January 29th, there was a lot of attention on this because the story was too big. Too many eyeballs were going to this. 4 12-year-old girls were forced to strip search at school while principals and nurses were watching them. And this was done because of their race. How could they not cover this story? It was a story too juicy not to be told. And it was going to be told. And it was going to be told in many, many places. And we had many activists, some of the same activists that we'd seen with the Black Lives Matter movement when it came into Binghamton, New York, were part of this movement. In fact, one of them was a gentleman by the name of Kymel Yard. And he spoke to inflame the emotions of the public.
My name is Kymel Yard, for the public record. I ran for school board. I work at the Boys and Girls Club of Binghamton. I know probably about, I'd say maybe half of you. I'm tired. I'm sure y'all are tired of seeing me come up here and be polite and calm. But today, that is done. I have witnessed. Well, matter of fact, if you're here for the kids, stand up. If you're here for the kids, stand up. Here we go. All of us. We restore our community and our children. And we did nothing to make sure it trickled down. Nothing. I have rode. I have gone about it your way. I got signatures. I ran. I got called out my name. I got disparaged for being a black man who stood up for his children. Right. I got told that because of my faith, I would not be able to be on the school board and I should not be allowed. Oh, this happened. I saw a union of people whose sole job is to defend, educate, and guide our children. Sit down when that same question was posed. But I'm supposed to believe that our board can create action that our administrators and our teachers will all.
Yes, and that was the message at the time. No, there were members of a new organization, a more activist organization. That was Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow. And that individual who happened to be part of that, well, that happened to be none other than Messiah Andrews, an individual who, since that time, has come out and been involved in several of the protests in 2020. That gentleman in the gray with the bald head, that is Messiah Andrews, the leader of PLOT, Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow, in Binghamton, New York. So we had a growth of activism and activists. We had the news media enraptured in a story that was juicy enough to get eyeballs all over. And it wasn't just in the local community. No, we're talking about eyeballs that came from everywhere. There were stories about this in the USA Today. And it brought in Governor Cuomo, as Governor Cuomo calls on state to investigate allegations that 4 black 12-year-old girls were strip searched at school. A story that could not be told. A story that went international, reaching out to the BBC. New York school strip search of black girls aged 12 investigated. It reached out to Australia. Shocking Shocking news that the news media was happy to blast across the entire world, denouncing the Binghamton School District, denouncing the teachers, the nurse, denouncing the racism that had to be part of the fault. And in fact, bringing in many people from outside the community to jump into this story, including the NAACP, who filed a lawsuit, a federal lawsuit, against the school district that illegally strip searched 12-year-old Black and Latina students. Every organization, all of the activists were involved. All of the news media were covering this, just telling us for months on end how this horrible thing had happened and that someone must be punished. In fact, we got to see that this story continued all the way until April 30th, where the Binghamton strip search lawsuit claims racial bias by East Middle School officials. Everyone was paying attention, and this was getting news on a consistent basis. The news media was making money to tell this same story over and over again, to make this same allegation over and over again. Plot and Black Lives Matter were gaining attention and gaining supporters based on this message of racism. And then, in May of 2019, with all the lawsuits out, the DA stated no charges in alleged strip search of teens at Binghamton School. The case sparked protests and prompted an investigation by both the Binghamton Police Department and state police. Governor Cuomo also called for the Department of Education to look into the alleged incident. In a letter sent to the district, DA Steve Cornwell said he has reviewed both investigations and agrees that no criminal charges will be filed. Suddenly, the bubble had burst. There was no crime. This wasn't true. The allegation, which had to equal guilt, didn't. Black Lives Matter no longer could trumpet this as being the case of racism, that this was a defiling of 12-year-old Black girls and Latinas. The changes in this story didn't matter. The fact is, someone had to be guilty because someone had to have committed a crime. It had to be true. Plot, Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow told us so. Black Lives Matter told us so. In fact, they had filed a 41-page complaint with attorneys present, with 50 additional pages of supplemental information. And this was what part of the lawsuit by the NAACP. It had to be true. There had to be some truth to it. And everyone held their breath for about a couple of weeks until the next news cycle started, until the elections for 2019 were done. And then everyone moved on, and everyone forgot. Conveniently, the news media that had helped promote this to an international story had nothing to say. They were gone. They went on to the next story. That's why, as it turned out, no one noticed that in September 14th of 2020, there was actually a decision. The lawsuit, the trial, the case actually came to a resolution. And as it turned out, much like was found by the DA, there was no case. There was no crime that was alleged. Point by point, the justices looked over the case, and in great detail, both citing legal reasons, precedents, and also in going through the extensive complaint made, there was no crime. The big claim that there was a strip search amounted to the fact that the 4 girls were asked to take off their shoes. Now, in New York State, that does equate to a strip search. by New York state rules about their schools. And you have to ask yourself, where was the news media on this story? Why weren't they telling everyone, no, Binghamton schools were not the racist hotbed that they had told the entire world about? Where was the news media saying that the allegations were not true, that the strip search was actually taking off shoes? Where were they on that? They must be waiting for something. There must be something else. There must be another reason why they wouldn't tell the public that had become divided and had created a racial divide within that city, destroying part of the trust of the community. There had to be something else that they were waiting for, because they didn't want to tell the public that there was a final decision. And you know what? They were right. There wasn't a final decision, because there was a follow-up. There was an appeal. And that appeal was resolved on November 13th of 2020. And that appeal upheld the prior decision, because there was no strip search. There was no racism. It didn't exist. It was a great story. It was great for the activists. It was great for the news media to make their money, and for the activists to gain political power, to become a stronghold in central New York. But it wasn't real. A detailed complaint, which was drafted with the assistance of legal counsel, attorneys, is 41 pages in length and has 50 pages of attachments. And even with all of that documentation, all of that legal wording, all of the hype internationally, it wasn't true. There wasn't anything to it. You may be wondering, well, Mike, if that's the case, and that's back in 2020, why are you talking about it today? Because the news media never told the public. In fact, we searched for this, and we're going to show you that search right now. The term is the Binghamton School Strip Search in Google, and we're going to refresh it for you right now. And if you look for this yourself, you're going to see stories, lots and lots of the same story, over and over and over again. No charges from the DA, allegations of a strip search, 12-year-old children. 6 months after a alleged strip search, activists are still angry. They're still seeking justice. The NAACP files a lawsuit. School officials deny the strip search accusations. 4 young girls strip searched. And this goes on for pages and pages and pages. In fact, we looked through the first 10 pages of the Google search engine, looking at the Google algorithm, trying to find any mention of the fact that there was a decision in this case. There wasn't. Not one at all. In fact, we only found out about it because a source contacted us saying that they had found the legal documentation, that this case had been resolved, and that someone needed to tell the public. Because it was sexy to have a story about 4 children getting strip searched in a school because of racism. It was a story to talk to the activists who declared that this was proof of the racism that they knew existed at always. And this is proof of why they needed to have equity, why they needed to have a voice, while their views had to be the views that were going to be heard by everyone. And the news media made money on this internationally. And the community was destroyed. The trust in a community was destroyed. A divide was created that continues to this day. As Black Lives Matter grows, as Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow, otherwise known as PLOT, grows, as Antifa cells have settled into this community. But the people, The students, the parents, they didn't gain anything. It shouldn't be about greed. It shouldn't be about power. It should be about the fact that someone made an allegation, that people were fired because of that allegation, and that allegation wasn't true, and that a community was potentially destroyed irreparably. And I'm really upset because this channel shouldn't be the first news media outlet to tell the public that this case wasn't real. It's sad that this is the tragedy that we have to talk about today. But I leave you with this thought. Do you really think the news media is trying to tell you all the news that's worthy of being printed? Or are they telling you the story that's going to make them the most money? Are the activists out there trying to do the very best thing for the community, or the thing that gets them the most power? It's not true that every activist wants power. It's not true that every news media outlet is looking for just the money. But it seems like in 2021, a lot more of them are doing that for the wrong reasons than for the right one. We thank you, and we look forward to hearing your comments. And in the description on YouTube, you'll be able to find all the links to everything that we've just discussed, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say about it. Thank you.